talk about Max Verstappen, who's looking for his third straight drivers' championship, and he can clinch it on Saturday, not Sunday. Yes, you heard that correctly. He can clinch it during the sprint, and all he has to do is finish sixth or better. Does that take some air out of this weekend, knowing that it could be over and done with? Or do we think that that's just, you know what, he's been dominant all season long, and it's only right that he wraps this thing up on a Saturday and we don't even have to wait till Sunday?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it takes the air out of it. I mean, the Sunday race will be interesting if we've all done all the championship stuff on Saturday. I think it might be a slightly more relaxed Sunday, because sometimes the funny thing that you don't often see when a driver wraps up a championship early, and not just then, a lot of the time on Sundays, media time is quite limited because a lot of the teams fly back on the Sunday evening. So you don't get a huge amount of time with the drivers. If Max wins on Saturday, and this is kind of inside the world of the media right here, we'll get a lot more time with him. We'll probably get time on Saturday with him, and then whatever he does after the race on Sunday. And then in terms of what you said about, is it fitting? I think it's actually a perfect way for him to win. He's not going to get that, Red Bull aren't going to get that undefeated season. He's not going to just keep winning till the end of the year. But this is such a unique thing, something we've never seen before. It's fitting in a season where he's already broken a great record of 10 straight wins. And I think it won't be something that, it won't be it won't be the headline piece of this season, him winning on a Saturday. But I think it's just such a quirky little fact. And I'm pretty sure no driver, I don't think any driver will have done that in the modern era, certainly. But I'd love to.
40 years ago, he'll be the first driver in 40 years to clinch the championship on a Saturday.
I knew there was one, and I couldn't remember when it was, but our guys at SIG sent around a email earlier, and so shame on me for not properly reading it. But yeah, so it shows you again more history setting, more record setting from Max, and on a year like this, how else is he going to do it? And I think selfishly we all want it to go to Austin just because we'll all be there, but sure. I think realistically, it's not going to happen.
You'll get to see it. And he's coming off of arguably one of his most dominant performances of the season in Suzuka. So we expect much of the same from him, obviously, here in Qatar. On the other side of the Red Bull garage, what are your expectations from Checo after what was a tough weekend in Japan?
Yeah, really tough weekend. And I mean, we've talked about Perez all season, his ups and downs, and the downs have been really low. They've been super, super low. And I think I mentioned it on the last pod. It felt like coming out the summer break, he'd kind of got over the worst of his poor form that kind of went into the summer break. You had a feeling, okay, he maybe is getting over some of that stuff. And then you see a weekend like Japan where it was terrible. I mean, he looked as bad as I think he's looked all season. I think Qatar in 21 is where he first got the nickname, the Minister of Defense. If you remember, he had some battles with Lewis at that race, and that. And then in the finale that year, he had a great spell where he held Lewis up for quite a while. And that was, if you think about Perez's time at Red Bull, he's obviously had some wins, but playing a role in that championship, I think, was one of his standout moments. I'm not saying he's going to be in a position to do that again, but, it's a circuit where clearly, he had a special moment with Red Bull before. So you just hope he gets it together, because no one likes to see a driver in a spiral like that. And because we know he's driving for Red Bull next season, it's kind of, you need him to be in a better position, because if Max is ahead again by a distance next year, we need Perez. I don't think anyone believes Perez can do it over a season, but we need at least that glimmer of hope Bottas used to give us at the start of a season, where it's like, oh, he wins a race or two and then it fades away. And I think maybe Perez did that this season. But yeah, I think he just needs a strong weekend. But I mean, what is that for Perez at the moment? I mean, what would you say? He qualified 5th in Japan, then obviously had that awful race that he did. But really, Red Bull were like, well, if he makes his way up the grid on Sunday, then he's done a good job. And it feels like their expectations now are so low that it's hard to quantify what a good weekend is for him now.
I think you'd have to expect top 5 in qualifying and then finishing second in the race. Like that's where your standard is based on what Max is doing in the RB19. But to your point, because he hasn't qualified consistently, we have lowered our expectations of, well, if he finishes in the points, but like that can't be the standard if you're Red Bull.
Yeah, right.
And that it's not. And so I think that's where the frustration and maybe a little bit of resentment has started to creep in between both parties. And I just ask you this because it felt like rumors were spinning this past weekend on Twitter and different social media platforms where it said, 2024, that Red Bull would look possibly to move on mid-season or after to Daniel Ricciardo, that Daniel Ricciardo would be the man in waiting. And we obviously know that there's a reason they're bringing Daniel Ricciardo back, but what do you make of that people are already pointing to 2024 midway through the season if he's not in great form.
I would never rule it out with Red Bull. I think with other teams,
Oh.
you definitely would. But if you look at Red Bull's track record, I mean, why not? I mean, that's how Verstappen got his chance at Red Bull. He replaced Kvyat early. Obviously, the reason Ricciardo came back was mid-season. There's been a lot of changes. So if there's any team that's going to do that, it would be Red Bull. I don't think Red Bull would do it for a number of reasons. I think that people overlook a lot of the time in Formula One. People overlook the importance of marketing and business. And Perez for Red Bull in the Latin market is huge, and he's not, he's not performing well, but he's
not hurting them either.
Yeah, like Max this season especially, Max has won the Constructors' Championship on his own, basically. He's still ahead. He still leads that. If you take his points, he's still ahead in that. So Perez is in an interesting position. I think it will be different next year if McLaren or Mercedes or Ferrari make a really big jump over the offseason and are really clipping at the heels of Red Bull. If Perez is still in this form, then absolutely, I think he's under a lot of pressure, because then suddenly his role goes from being, we don't just need him to be number two and good for marketing and good for, what we're trying to do in these regions. It's actually, well, we also need him to be doing well on track and actually winning us this championship. So I think it all hinges on that. The presence of Liam Lawson as well would make me think it is a possibility now, because if Red Bull did want to do that midway through next year, they know now as well they've got Liam Lawson there who can step in, and we've seen what a great job he's done. So if anything, that has probably added to the speculation and that rumor, strengthened that rumor. But from what I've heard from Red Bull, that's very unlikely Perez would ever be moved out. But it is telling that they've already talked about, it's like, well, he's got a contract to the end of 2024. I can't see any world where Perez gets a contract beyond that at the moment, unless we see a significant turnaround next year. I think in Red Bull's heads, they're already kind of thinking, who's the next guy in that car alongside Max after Perez? Some people might question when that decision gets made, but I still think it will be end of 24. I mean, I'm a huge Ricciardo fan. I'd love it to be earlier, but at the moment, the way things are, I can't see it. But we've seen things change this year in the space of 3 months. So, this podcast might age quite badly if we look back at it in about 6 months or something.
Yeah, fair enough. Checo just needs to win Monaco again. Isn't that when he got his contract extension last season?
Yes.
Yeah. So just go
That's
win
right.
Monaco and then get some goodwill.
That's when we're still calling him the Street King as well, which seems like a million years ago now, because that was a nickname that we said without irony as well. We're like, this guy on street circuits is mega. This year,
of the season. At the beginning of the season, we were still calling him that.
Yeah. And then obviously 2 of his worst performances since Monaco and Singapore, have been on street circuits as well. So hard to see light at the end of the tunnel for Perez, but for his longer term future, you feel like he's safe for the time being.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube, and for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.